Midnight, a mountain canyon, 12 bikers, 30 guns. The ambush came out of nowhere. Roadblocks sealed every exit, muzzle flashes split the darkness, and the convoy's lead rider took a round through the shoulder before anyone could shout a warning. 30 armed attackers, 0 escape routes, and a club president on his knees behind a burning motorcycle, whispering into a dead radio. Then a single suppressed shot cracked from somewhere up on the ridge. One attacker dropped, then another. Nobody saw the shooter. Nobody called it in. But every biker locked eyes across that canyon and understood the same thing in the same instant. Someone else was already in this fight. If you've never subscribed to this channel, do it right now. Because what happened on that ridge in a midnight storm is the kind of story that doesn't make the news, doesn't appear in any report, and disappears the moment the rain stops. Hit like, drop your city and country in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Don't look away. The rain had been falling for 3 hours before it became a problem. It started as drizzle, somewhere around mile marker 47 on Route 9. The kind of thin, cold mist that fogs your visor and makes the asphalt shimmer like black glass beneath headlights. By the time the convoy reached the canyon approach at the base of Kessler Ridge, it had turned into something else entirely. Sheets of it. Cold and sideways and mean, the kind that finds the gap between your collar and your neck and runs straight down your spine no matter how well your gear fits. 12 bikes, 2 cargo vans, 1 ancient flatbed truck carrying relief supplies, canned food, medical kits, blankets, bound for the flood-displaced families sheltering in the Valley Community Centers 40 miles north. It was a volunteer run. It always was with these guys. The Iron Covenant Motorcycle Club didn't advertise their charity work. They just did it, the same way they did most things, quietly, with their hands, in weather nobody else wanted to ride in. Marcus Webb rode point. He was 51 years old, built like a defensive lineman who'd traded the gym for decades of hard road work, and he had a face that looked like it had been carved out of something tougher than skin, jaw heavy, eyes permanently narrowed against headwinds, a scar running from his left cheekbone to the corner of his mouth, from a bar fight in Tucson 19 years ago that he never talked about. President of Iron Covenant for 11 years. Vietnam veteran's son. 2 tours in Iraq as a combat engineer before the IED outside Fallujah put a titanium rod in his femur and sent him home with a limp that got worse in cold weather. Tonight, his leg ached. He noticed it the way you notice old injuries, as information, not complaint. His radio crackled. Darnell Chunk Washington, riding tail position in a battered leather cut that was older than most of the club's junior members, came through clear despite the weather. Webb. Mile marker 52. Something's wrong with this road. Marcus keyed his radio. Talk to me. Debris on the shoulder. Fresh. Somebody moved something recently. Branches, rocks. Looks cleared. Deliberately. That was the thing about Chunk. 2 decades as a county sheriff's deputy before he retired had given him a set of eyes that never fully switched off. He saw patterns. He saw things that weren't supposed to be there. He saw the shape of human intention in what other people dismissed as random roadside clutter. Marcus eased back on his throttle, letting the convoy naturally compress behind him. He scanned the ridge walls rising on both sides. They were deep in the canyon section now. The road dropped here, ran tight between rock faces for about a quarter mile before opening up on the northern descent. He'd ridden this route a dozen times. He knew the geometry of it. High walls, single lane plus shoulder, maybe 30 yards of visible sky if you tilted your head straight up. Copy that, Chunk. Eyes up. Everyone closed the gap. Ahead, his headlight found the first roadblock. It wasn't dramatic. That was the thing that struck him first. Just a pickup truck, angled across both lanes, lights off, positioned where the canyon narrowed to its tightest point. It could have been a breakdown. It could have been an accident. Marcus had his hand on the brake before his mind had fully processed what he was seeing, some combat-wired fragment of his nervous system operating on a timeline ahead of conscious thought. He stopped the convoy 40 yards back. The rain hammered everything. His engine idled. Behind him, 11 other bikes came to a stop in sequence. A sound like dominoes falling backward, each engine dropping to idle, each headlight steady and forward-facing, illuminating the wall of rain between them and the truck. That's not an accident, said Ricky Flores over the radio, second position, youngest road captain the club had ever voted in at 27. Ricky had done a single enlistment in the Marine Corps, motor transport, nothing glamorous. But he'd done a deployment that put him in Helmand province for 8 months, and he came back with the same particular attentiveness that Marcus recognized in himself. Nobody parks like that in weather like this. That's an intentional block. Agreed, Marcus said. Chunk, what's behind us? A pause. The rain, the engines. Webb. Chunk's voice had changed, flattened. We've got a second vehicle at the tail, just rolled across the road, lights off. Marcus didn't swear. He breathed once, slow, the way his father had taught him to breathe when everything was simultaneously going wrong. He reached into his saddlebag and came out with his hand radio. The backup unit, long range, the one he'd started carrying 2 years ago after a run-in through the Sierras where they'd lost cellular for 6 straight hours. He keyed it. Nothing. Static. He tried again. More static. Then something. A compressed, layered noise that wasn't weather interference. It was active jamming. Somebody was burning a signal in their frequency band. Radios are jammed, he said on the club channel, which was shorter range and apparently still functioning. We're cut off from outside contact. Then the lights came on. 12 of them, maybe more, mounted on the ridge walls, on vehicles he hadn't seen parked in the shadows, on handheld units carried by figures who materialized from between rocks and from behind the brush on the canyon shoulders. They came up all at once, flooding the road with harsh white light from every angle, the kind of illumination designed specifically to blind and disorient. Tactical lights, handheld and vehicle-mounted, all aimed inward, at the convoy, creating a blinding ring from which there was no direction to look that didn't contain light directly in your eyes. Marcus counted what he could count. Figures, armed, moving to positions with the practiced spacing of people who had done this before. He couldn't get an exact number. The light was working exactly as intended, degrading his visibility while they used it as cover. But he counted at least 20 before he stopped counting because the number was already too high. Don't reach, he said into the club radio, voice flat and carrying the specific weight of a man who needed no one to misunderstand him. Hands visible. Nobody draws. I mean nobody. He got off his bike slowly, both hands out. He walked forward. A man stepped out from behind the blocked pickup, heavy set, wearing a tactical rain jacket with no markings, face partially covered by a balaclava. He carried a rifle at low ready, finger along the frame rather than inside the guard, which meant he was practiced enough to know trigger discipline but wanted Marcus to see the weapon. President Webb. The man's voice was conversational, unhurried, the voice of someone who had calculated the geometry of this situation in advance and found it favorable. Nice night for a ride. Marcus stopped. You know my name. I know a lot of things. I know what's in those vans. I know where it's going. I know you've got 11 riders behind you and 2 civilian drivers and not a single person in this canyon who's going to help you. A pause, as if savoring the math. The supplies stay. The vehicles stay. Your people walk out. That's not going to happen, Marcus said. The man tilted his head slightly. I don't think you've fully appreciated your options. I think I have. Marcus looked at the ridge walls. He looked at the lights. He looked at the positioning of the figures he could see, measuring angles, measuring distances, running the same calculation in his head that his bones had been running since Fallujah, which is to say, badly, the math coming up wrong in every direction. I think I'm looking at roughly 20 to 30 armed people in a prepared position. I think our radios are jammed. I think our rear exit is blocked, and our front exit is blocked, and the walls are 30 feet high. I think you planned this for some time, so you understand. I understand you put a lot of work into this. I'm curious why. The man didn't answer, which told Marcus the answer wasn't something he intended for Marcus to have. He walked back to his bike. Sit tight, he said quietly into the club radio. Don't give them a reason. Behind him, he heard Ricky's voice, low and level. How many? Too many, maybe 30. Prepared positions. Light discipline flipped. They've got the advantage. What do we do? Marcus looked at the ridge wall, at the darkness above the lights, at the rain coming down through whatever gap existed between the canyon walls and the sky, falling in cold vertical sheets that the lights turned silver when they hit them. He didn't have an answer. I was building toward one, the same way he'd learned to build toward answers in places where all the obvious answers were gone, slowly, looking for the thing nobody else had thought to look for, The angle that only opened up when you stopped staring at the problem and started staring at its edges. He keyed the backup radio once more, not to transmit to anyone he knew, just to listen, just to sit inside the static and see if there was any shape to it. There was a voice, faint, layered under interference like something compressed through very little bandwidth. Female, calm, unhurried. The way you're only unhurried when hurrying is something you decided a long time ago was not useful to you. Iron convoy, you're reading me partial. Don't respond. I know your radio's limited. I'll carry the channel. Marcus stared at his handset. I have eyes on your position and the positions around you. 31 personnel, 4 vehicles, 3 elevated emplacements on the north wall, and 2 on the south. Your exit is not through the front or the rear. Sit tight and let me work. Static, rain. Then, from somewhere above on the north ridge, sharp, clean, suppressed. A single rifle shot. One of the floodlights at the far end of the canyon went dark. Nobody moved for 3 seconds. Then the blockers on the far end of the pickup began shouting to each other, voices crossing, their discipline fraying at the edges when the thing they hadn't planned for arrived without introduction. What the? North wall, north wall. I don't have a second shot, another light out. This one on the south wall emplacement, east end. Marcus stood behind his motorcycle with his hand on his radio and felt the specific quality of silence that falls over a group of men who have just understood that they are no longer the only predator in the canyon. Chunk's voice came through, barely audible, like a man talking with his chin pressed to the ground. Webb, you hearing this? Hearing it? Who is that? Marcus looked at the ridge, at the rain, at the darkness above the lights that still remained. I don't know, he said. The woman on the radio spoke again. Club president, I need you to listen carefully because I'm only going to say this once, and we're going to lose this channel in about 4 minutes when they figure out what frequency I'm on. Marcus keyed it. Go. Get your people behind the cargo vans. North side lean. Use the vehicles as cover from their south wall emplacements. The northeast emplacement is dark. I have angle on the southwest nest, but I need 90 seconds before I take it, so you cannot move until I say. Tell your riders to stay low and stay quiet, and don't fire unless something comes through the vans. Who are you? A pause. Not a confused pause. A considered one. Overwatch. That's enough. 90 seconds. Get them moving. Marcus turned to his riders. He didn't explain. There wasn't time, and these were men who had learned long ago that explanations in moments of extremity are a luxury, not a requirement. He signaled, hand flat, low, push left. And they responded the way they always responded to him, without hesitation, without question, 12 people who trusted the man in front because he had never once spent their trust carelessly. They moved behind the vans, low, quiet. The 2 civilian drivers, both volunteers, both retirees named Pete and Carol, who drove this route twice a month and had never in 7 years encountered anything more threatening than a blown tire, were already pressed against the interior walls of their vehicles, white-faced and still, Carol with his rosary out, and Pete with a fixed stare that Marcus recognized as the expression of someone who had found the particular calm that lives on the other side of pure terror. Marcus counted. 1. Rain. 2. 3. Somewhere on the southwest wall, a burst of shouted Arabic mixed with Spanish. 2 languages. International composition. That told him something he filed away. 4. 89. 9. 90. From the southwest ridge, crack, clean, suppressed. The kind of shot that travels to you as sound only after the event has already concluded. A light stand on the south wall toppled sideways, clanging against rock. A figure went down with it, not dramatically, just a man who was standing and then was not. Move left, Overwatch said in his radio. Machine gun emplacement northeast is still live, but they're turning it to find me. You've got a window, left side of the canyon wall, single file. Move your wounded first. Marcus looked at his riders. Wounded. He hadn't... Ricky was already at his elbow. Danner took a round, shoulder. He's up, but he's bleeding. Tommy Danner, 26 years old. The club's newest full-patch member, 3 months patched in, rode a '09 Road King he'd rebuilt himself from a frame he found at a salvage yard. Marcus hadn't even heard the shot. He hadn't heard it because it had come in the same moment the lights came on, One of those early warning shots that gets fired when the people doing the ambushing are announcing themselves with lead before words. Get him up. He goes first. Webb, Chunk again. They're repositioning. East side, 2 men, moving to flank. Overwatch, east flank, 2 men. Her response came back in 4 seconds. I see them. Keep moving. Don't stop for anything on the east side. A pause. Trust me. He did. He didn't know why. He didn't know who she was or what she was doing on that ridge or what her angle was on any of this. Whether she was a rival party to whoever had set this ambush. Whether she was law enforcement. Whether she was something else entirely that he didn't have a category for yet. He knew nothing about her except the precision of the shots she'd taken so far and the quality of her voice on a degraded radio channel and the fact that every instruction she'd given had kept his people from bleeding more than they already were. That was enough. In Marcus Webb's experience, that was more than enough. The convoy moved, single file, low, pressed to the canyon's north wall where the remaining light didn't fully reach. Tommy Danner at the front with Ricky's arm around him, leather jacket soaked through and the shoulder of his cut dark and wet in a way that had nothing to do with rain. The flatbed truck's driver, Pete, hands shaking but focused, eased the vehicle forward at walking pace, its engine deliberately low, lights off. From the east side of the canyon came 2 quick, close shots, not suppressed. Overwatch. From close range this time, which meant she'd moved. Neither of the 2 flanking figures fired back. Marcus walked last. Old instinct. He scanned behind them, watching the positions of the armed figures still visible, watching how they were reacting. Confusion, mostly. Repositioning without a coherent picture of the threat. He saw one man gesturing at another, pointing toward the ridge, then pointing toward the convoy, unable to decide which problem was more pressing. He saw another man keying a radio and getting nothing back. Their own jamming equipment working against them now, their command channel as dead as everything else. Keep going, Overwatch said. 200 yards. There's a break in the north wall, old mining access. Wide enough for your flatbed. Take it. Where does it lead? Out. That's not an answer. It's the only answer that matters right now, President Webb. He was quiet for a moment. Then, copy. They found the gap where she said it would be. A fractured section of the canyon wall, the rock split decades ago by water and frost, widened by what looked like old machinery. The flatbed cleared it with 4 inches on either side. The bikes went through in pairs. Marcus went through last. Behind him, from somewhere back in the canyon, the sounds of men arguing in multiple languages rose and fell and rose again. And over all of it, intermittent and precise, the suppressed crack of a rifle doing its work in the dark. He came out the other side of the gap onto a gravel service road running parallel to the main route. Rain, darkness. His headlight cut 20 yards into nothing. He keyed his radio. Overwatch. We're through. Silence. Overwatch. Static. He waited. Rain on his visor, rain on the chrome, rain on 12 bikes and 2 vans and a flatbed full of supplies for people who had lost everything to a flood and needed this convoy to arrive. Then her voice came back, quieter now, compressed down by what sounded like physical effort or distance or both. Good. Keep moving north. Don't stop at anything that looks like a checkpoint. I'll hold the canyon for 20 minutes. After that, you're on your own. What happens after 20 minutes? The channel went quiet. Not static. Quiet. The deliberate quiet of a radio that had been switched off from the other end. Marcus sat on his bike at the mouth of the service road for 3 seconds. His leg ached. His riders were behind him, soaked and breathing hard. Tommy Danner pale and leaning against Ricky with his hand pressed to his shoulder. Carol the driver had his window down, staring at Marcus with an expression that was equal parts relief and incomprehension. Marcus faced north. He opened his throttle. The Iron Covenant moved. And somewhere behind them, in the dark canyon filling up with rain and consequence, a single suppressed rifle spoke again and again and again. 2 miles north, on the gravel road, Ricky pulled up alongside Marcus and shouted over the engine noise and weather. Who is she? Marcus kept his eyes on the road. Don't know. She pulled us through that. 30 men, Webb. 30. Yeah. So who does that? Who's sitting on a ridge in a storm like this with a rifle and a radio waiting for... Ricky. What? Ride. They rode. The radio in Marcus's jacket pocket crackled once, sharp and brief. Not static, not weather. A human sound. A short, compressed exhale. The kind of sound you make when something costs more than you planned. Then nothing. Marcus's hand tightened on the throttle. He didn't slow down. She told him not to. He didn't slow down, and he didn't look back. And he kept the Iron Covenant moving north through the dark and the rain. And somewhere in the back of his mind, behind the route calculation, behind the first aid assessment of Tommy's shoulder, behind the logistics of getting the convoy to its destination, a question sat heavy and unanswered. What is she holding that canyon against? 3 miles behind them, a burst of automatic weapons fire tore through the rain. Then silence. Then, after a long moment that stretched like wire under tension, a single shot, suppressed, clean, and then nothing at all. The automatic weapons fire faded into the rain like a door slamming in a house 3 blocks away, felt more than heard, absorbed by the canyon walls and the weather and the 4 miles of gravel road that now separated the Iron Covenant from whatever was happening back there. Marcus kept his eyes forward. He did not allow himself to think about the silence that followed the burst. He cataloged it, filed it, and rode. Tommy Danner needed a hospital. That was the immediate problem. The only problem Marcus allowed himself to carry right now, because a man who tried to carry everything carried nothing well. Tommy's shoulder had stopped bleeding as freely. Ricky had torn a strip from his own undershirt and packed the entry wound somewhere around mile 2, the way field-expedient medicine always looked, ugly, improvised, and functional. But Tommy's face had gone the color of old concrete, and he was riding with his left arm locked against his body at an angle that meant any movement of the shoulder was producing pain he was choosing not to vocalize. He was choosing not to vocalize it, which in Marcus's experience meant it was bad. "Chunk," Marcus said into the club radio. "You got cellular yet?" Chunk was riding sweep, hanging back 50 yards, watching the road behind them. "Partial signal, 1 bar. Keep going north. There's a ridge break about a mile up. Should open up. First signal you get, call Harmonic County. Tell him we need a trauma team, and tell him where we're coming out. Don't call 911 dispatch. Call Harmon directly." Copy. Deputy Sheriff Frank Harmon was the one law enforcement contact Marcus trusted without reservation. A man who had ridden with the club twice on charity runs, who understood what the Iron Covenant was and was not, and who would get a trauma team moving before he asked a single question. That mattered. Questions could wait. Tommy Danner's shoulder could not. The gravel road climbed, pine trees closed in on both sides, branches thrashing in the wind, and the rain came down through them in fat, channeled drops that hit Marcus's visor like thrown gravel. His headlight found the road in 30-yard increments. Enough to ride, not enough to plan, which was exactly the kind of visibility that forced you to commit to the next 30 yards without knowing what came after. He'd spent a lot of his life navigating exactly that way. The road crested the ridge and the valley opened below them, dark, rain-blurred, but undeniably there. Lights from the valley towns glittered through the weather. Marcus exhaled once, slow, and felt Chunk's voice come through before he'd even reached for the radio. "Got signal. Calling Harmon now." "Good." Marcus pulled over. The convoy compacted behind him. Bikes, vans, flatbed, everyone idling in the rain on the shoulder of a ridge road with mud on their boots, and the specific hollow quality in their faces that comes from surviving something that had every structural reason to go differently. Marcus walked back along the line, checking faces, checking hands, checking whether anyone was hiding something worse than wet clothes and rattled nerves. Ricky met him at Tommy's bike. Tommy was still mounted, which took some stubbornness considering. He had his right hand gripping the handlebar and his left arm pinned against his ribs, and his jaw set in the expression of a man who had decided that falling over was not an option he was willing to consider. His cut was soaked through, the Iron Covenant patch on his back dark with rain and with something else along the left shoulder seam. Marcus crouched to look at the improvised dressing. "Through and through," Ricky said quietly. "I think. Entries clean. Exit, I'm less sure about." "Can you feel your fingers?" Marcus asked Tommy. "Yeah." "All of them?" A pause. "Most of them." Which meant nerve involvement was possible and bone involvement was possible, and the next hour mattered more than the last hour. Marcus straightened. "Harmon's got a trauma team coming. You ride in the van." "I can—" "Tommy." Not loud, just certain. "Van." Tommy looked at him for a moment, looked at his bike, made the calculation that Marcus had watched every young rider make eventually, the one where you weigh pride against reality and reality wins. Not because pride stops mattering, but because you finally understand that reality doesn't negotiate. He let Ricky help him off the bike. Marcus walked to the front of the convoy and stood in the rain at the crest of the ridge road and looked back south toward the canyon they'd come out of. He couldn't see it. Too much distance, too much weather, too many pine trees in between. He could see nothing of what was happening back there, and he told himself that was fine, that she'd told him to keep riding, and he'd kept riding, that he'd done exactly what she'd asked. He stood there for 45 seconds anyway. Then Carol, the driver, leaned out his van window. "Mr. Webb, road's clear ahead. Whenever you're ready." Marcus turned around and got on his bike. They came down into the valley town of Marston at 2:15 in the morning, 12 bikes and 2 vans and a flatbed truck grinding through empty streets still shining with rain, and Harmon was already there. Unmarked county vehicle parked at the junction of Route 9 and Millbrook Road, lights off, Harmon himself standing outside it in a rain jacket with his arms folded, watching them come in with the expression of a man who had heard enough on the phone to know that questions could wait. The ambulance was 30 seconds behind him. They got Tommy loaded with the professional efficiency of people who did not have time to ask how this happened, and Marcus stood at the ambulance bay while the paramedics worked and Harmon stood next to him saying nothing, which was one of the things Marcus had always valued about the man. Finally, Harmon said, "Canyon ambush." "Yeah." "How many?" 30, roughly, coordinated, jammers, prepared positions, multiple vehicles. Harmon absorbed this. He was 53, lean and deliberate, with a face that had spent too many years keeping its own counsel to give much away. "Who hit you? Rival club?" "No." Marcus thought about the man in the tactical jacket speaking in that conversational, unhurried voice. Something else. Multi-language. Coordinated enough to know our route and our timing. Intel leak. Has to be. Harmon wrote nothing down. He was that kind of law enforcement, the kind that processed things first and papered them later, which meant nothing got lost and nothing got buried. "You said you got out. How?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. He watched the paramedic cut away Tommy's sleeve. "We had help." "From?" "Don't know yet." Harmon looked at him sideways. "Marcus. Woman on the radio. Called herself Overwatch. She had eyes on the canyon, knew the positions, knew the numbers, gave us a route out through a mining gap in the north wall. She was shooting, suppressed rifle, multiple confirmed hits. She stayed behind when we moved." "Stayed behind." "Yeah." The words sat there in the rain between them. Harmon's face did what it sometimes did when he was processing something that didn't have an obvious filing location, a very slight compression around the eyes, like a man trying to read small print. "She give you anything else? Name, affiliation, radio identifier?" "Just Overwatch. And she's still back there." "Was, last I knew, 30 minutes ago, maybe more." Harmon pulled out his phone. "I'm going to make some calls." "I figured." "Don't go anywhere." Marcus watched him walk to his vehicle. Then he walked back to his riders. They were gathered at the edge of the gas station parking lot where the convoy had stopped, 12 men in soaked leather, some sitting on their bikes, some standing, all of them carrying the particular stillness of people who have been through something and haven't yet decided what to do with it. Chunk was at the center of the loose cluster, which was where Chunk always ended up. Not because he pushed toward it, but because he was the kind of man that other men oriented toward without thinking about it. Ricky was sitting on a concrete parking curb with his elbows on his knees and his hands clasped between them, staring at nothing specific about 18 inches in front of his boots. He had blood on his left hand from when he'd packed Tommy's wound, dried now and dark. Marcus stopped in front of them. Nobody spoke. He looked at each face in turn, a thing he'd started doing after his first tour, a habit that started as duty and became something else, a way of accounting that went beyond head count. He looked at them the way you look at people you are specifically responsible for. "Tommy's being worked on. He's going to be fine," Marcus said. "Rest of you are intact." Chunk said, "What about the supplies?" "Still on the flatbed. Carol's got it." "We finished the run?" Marcus looked at him. "That's what we came for." Chunk nodded once. "Who wants to tell me," Ricky said, not looking up from his boots, "how 30 armed people knew exactly where we were going to be in exactly that canyon, at exactly this time, on a route we only confirmed 6 hours ago. Nobody answered because it wasn't a question that had an answer yet. It was the kind of question that got asked out loud because keeping it internal was worse. We figure that out, Marcus said, but not tonight. She's still back there. Ricky finally looked up. His face was younger when he was angry, or maybe just more honest. We just left her. She told us to. She told us to keep riding. She didn't say abandon her. Ricky, Webb, she took on 30 people so we could walk out. We don't even know if she's... I know. Marcus's voice was level, not cold. Level. The distinction mattered. I know what she did. I know what we owe. But I also know that going back into that canyon with 12 bikes and no tactical intel is how we get more people shot. Harmon's making calls. Let the people with resources handle the response. What if there's nothing left to respond to? The words landed and sat there. Ricky wasn't wrong, and Marcus didn't pretend he was. He just absorbed it, the way he absorbed all the things he couldn't fix by moving faster, with his weight distributed evenly and his hands at his sides and his eyes steady. Then we find out who she was, Marcus said, and we make sure that counts for something. Ricky looked at him for a long moment, then he looked back at his boots. A quarter-mile away, in the yellow light of a 24-hour diner that was open because some places never close, Pete the civilian driver was sitting at the counter with a cup of coffee held in both hands and his chin almost touching the rim. Carol was in the booth behind him, not eating, just sitting. Two men who drove relief supplies twice a month because they wanted to do something useful in retirement, and who had just spent 40 minutes pressed against the interior wall of a cargo van listening to gunfire while a stranger on a radio they couldn't hear dismantled an ambush from somewhere in the dark above them. Marcus watched them through the diner window for a moment. Then he went in. He sat next to Pete. He didn't say anything right away. He just sat, and after a moment, the woman behind the counter, 50s, gray-streaked hair, the face of someone who had heard most of the things a person could say in a diner at 2 a.m, set a coffee in front of him without being asked. He drank it. Pete said, "I've been doing this run for 7 years. I know. Nothing like that's ever..." He stopped. Recalibrated. "I've never been shot at. Most people haven't. Is that..." Pete set down his coffee. "Is that normal for you? Was that something that..." "No," Marcus said. "That wasn't normal. That was something that was planned specifically for tonight." Pete absorbed this with the expression of a man reordering his understanding of how the world worked. The supplies. They wanted the supplies? Seems that way. Why would anyone... Another stop. They're for flood victims. Yeah. So someone planned an armed ambush to steal supplies from flood victims. Or to stop us from delivering them. Might be different motives. Pete stared at his coffee. "That's a very cold thing," he said. "Yes." "Who does that?" Marcus didn't answer because the answer was people with something to gain from the flood victims not being helped, which opened a door onto a kind of calculation he wasn't ready to walk through in a diner at 2 a.m. with a retired school teacher who drove relief convoys because he believed in the general goodness of organizing to help people. He drank his coffee. His phone buzzed. Harmon. He stepped outside. "State police are moving," Harmon said, voice flat and businesslike. "Canyon will be secured within the hour. I've also made contact with a federal field office. I'm not going to specify which one over the phone, and they have a significant interest in the situation. Federal. The multi-language element, the jamming equipment, the coordination. This wasn't opportunistic, Marcus. Someone organized this specifically." "I know. They're also interested in your radio contact." Marcus was quiet. "Overwatch," Harmon said. "The feds have flagged that identifier. I'm not going to tell you what that means because I don't fully know what it means, but when I said the name to my contact, the quality of his attention changed. Changed how? Like someone had just told him something he'd been waiting to hear. The rain had thinned to mist now. Marcus stood in the parking lot of a gas station in a valley town at 2:30 in the morning with a cooling coffee in his hand and looked at the sky, where the cloud cover was breaking apart in the wind and letting through, in the gaps, the specific cold brightness of stars after a storm. "Is she alive?" he asked. "Don't know yet. Units aren't in the canyon yet." He nodded, which was a gesture that meant nothing since Harmon couldn't see him, but some responses are older than phone calls. Marcus. Yeah. The federal contact asked me something. He asked if she made contact with you at any point before the convoy, if she reached out ahead of time. No, she came on the radio after the ambush was already sprung. He's going to want to talk to you. Fine. Tonight. Tonight. Marcus checked the time. I need a few hours first. I've got a rider in the trauma bay and a delivery to finish. A pause. The delivery. That's why we rode out here, Frank. Another pause. Then something that was almost a sound of acknowledgement, low in Harmon's chest. I'll tell him morning. Fair? Fair. He hung up. The Iron Covenant delivered the supplies at 4:17 in the morning. The community center in the valley town of Ridgeport was a converted high school gymnasium that smelled of industrial cleaner and other people's clothes, where roughly 200 flood-displaced people had been sleeping on cots for 6 days. The relief coordinator, a woman named Pauline, mid-40s, the kind of exhausted that comes from running on purpose rather than circumstance, met them at the loading bay with a clipboard and red-rimmed eyes and an expression that shifted when she saw what was on the flatbed into something that wasn't quite happiness but was close enough. You made it, she said. Yeah, Marcus said. She looked at his riders, at the mud on their boots and the rain still in their cuts and the quality of stillness they were all carrying. She looked at Ricky's dried, blood-dark hand. She was smart enough not to ask. Thank you, she said. That's what we do, Marcus said. They unloaded for 40 minutes. All 12 riders, without discussion, lifting and carrying and stacking medical kits, canned goods, blankets, water purification tablets, infant formula, moving through the loading bay with the focused efficiency of people who knew how to work and wanted something physical to do with the hours they had left before they had to stop moving and sit with what had happened. An old man stopped Marcus in the hallway outside the bay. 70s, thin, wearing a flannel shirt that was 2 sizes too large. He had the look of someone who'd been wearing the same clothes for days. You're the one who brought all this? He said. My people, Marcus said. The old man nodded slowly. He looked at Marcus's leather cut, at the patch, at the president's rocker beneath it. My grandson rides, he said. Always told him those biker clubs were trouble. Marcus said nothing. I was wrong about that, the old man said, and walked back into the gymnasium. Marcus stood in the hallway for a moment. Then he went back to the loading bay. What? The federal agent arrived at 6:45 in the morning at the gas station where the Iron Covenant had reconvened after the delivery. He came alone, which Marcus found interesting, in a rental sedan that still had the agency barcode sticker visible on the rearview mirror, which suggested he'd driven through the night to get here. He was younger than Marcus expected, maybe late 30s, neat in the particular way of someone who keeps themselves neat as professional discipline rather than natural inclination, wearing a jacket that was slightly wrong for the weather in a way that suggested he'd packed for a different assignment. His name was Caldwell. He showed credentials that Marcus looked at carefully and found in order. They sat in Marcus's truck cab. Rain was starting again, thin and half-hearted, the tail end of the storm working through its last reserves. Caldwell set a recorder on the dash and Marcus looked at it. Background only, Caldwell said. Nothing admissible. I just need accuracy. Fine. They went through it. Marcus gave him the timeline, the numbers, the positions, the jamming, the mining gap, the radio contact. He was precise, because precision was the form of honesty he'd always found most useful. Caldwell listened without interrupting, which was the behavior of someone who already had a framework and was calibrating rather than building from scratch. When Marcus finished, Caldwell was quiet for a moment. The voice, he said. Describe it. Female. American. No regional marker I could identify. Mid-range. Calm. Not performed calm. Actual calm. The kind that comes from doing something a lot of times. Age? Hard to say over a degraded channel. Adult. Could be anything from late 20s to mid-40s. Accent? Nothing. Marcus looked at him. Why does the identifier matter to you? Caldwell picked up the recorder, set it down again. It's an old identifier, operational call sign from a program that was officially discontinued 8 years ago. Officially. That's a precise word choice. I'm a precise person. Caldwell looked at him steadily. The people who used that call sign were very good at what they did. The The kind of good that makes certain assets difficult to simply decommission when a program ends because the capability exists independent of the institutional structure. Marcus said, "So she went freelance." "That's one interpretation." "What's another?" "That she never stopped working, that the program didn't end, it just stopped having a budget line that appeared in public documents." The rain picked up again. It drummed on the truck roof in the irregular rhythm that rain always produced, never quite settling into a pattern, always almost becoming something regular and then veering away from it. "Is she alive?" Marcus asked. "State police secured the canyon at 0430, Caldwell said. 12 attackers were found incapacitated or deceased. The remainder had withdrawn. Evidence of sustained engagement across multiple positions. Blood evidence indicating at least one additional wounded party present at the primary firing position. At least one. Blood type inconsistent with the attackers accounted for." Marcus stared through the windshield at the rain on the parking lot. "She was hit," he said. "At some point, yes. She wasn't there when units arrived." "Gone." "Gone," Caldwell confirmed, which is consistent with a certain operational profile. Self-extraction under fire. No trace left beyond the physical evidence of engagement. "But she was bleeding." "Yes." Marcus was quiet. He thought about the sound on the radio, that compressed exhale, the one he'd filed as cost, as something being spent. He'd been right about what it was. He'd just underestimated the denomination. "I need to ask you something," Caldwell said, "and I need you to answer it honestly." "Go ahead." "Did she give you anything? A physical object, a note, any kind of—" "No, we never saw her." "Contact information? A way to reach her?" "Nothing." Caldwell nodded slowly. He picked up his recorder and turned it off. The formality of the gesture said something, that what came next was off the record not because it was secret, but because it was personal. The people she protected tonight, the convoy, the supplies. Yeah. She didn't have to do that. Whoever she is, whatever she's doing out there, that canyon wasn't her problem. The Iron Covenant wasn't her responsibility. Marcus waited. "Somebody made a choice tonight," Caldwell said. "A significant personal cost choice for people she'd never met, for a reason I haven't been able to identify through any institutional framework I have access to." He opened the truck door. The rain came in, cold and direct. "I thought you should know that the choice was real, the cost was real." He got out. Marcus sat alone in his truck and listened to the rain and looked at nothing for a long moment. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his cut and took out the backup radio. The long-range unit, the one he'd been carrying on this frequency all night. He pressed the transmit key once, held it, didn't speak. Just held it. A gesture that meant nothing in any tactical sense and everything in the human sense. A held door, a light left on. Static. He released the key. He sat for another minute. Then Chunk knocked on the driver's window, and Marcus put the radio away and got out of the truck, and the Iron Covenant president walked back to his people in the rain to figure out what came next. Behind him, on the seat of the truck, the radio sat silent. 11 miles south, on a logging road that wound through pine forest well away from any maintained route, a woman in a logistics company jacket sat with her back against the passenger wheel. Well of a vehicle she had not arrived in, and pressed a folded cloth against her left side, and breathed carefully and deliberately, the breath of someone managing pain the way you manage any resource in the field, which is to say, rationing it, spending only what you have to, saving the rest for the work still ahead. Her radio was off. Her eyes were open. The rain came through the pine canopy in thin, scattered drops, the worst of the storm having passed, and in the quiet that followed the storm she could hear, faintly, the sound of a road somewhere through the trees, traffic resuming, the valley going back to its ordinary business, the way ordinary business always resumed after extraordinary nights, without knowing what had made the resumption possible. She listened to it for a while. Then she reached for her phone. Different device, different number, a contact stored under a name that was not a name, and typed 4 words. Package delivered. Costs acceptable. She sent it. She put the phone away. She looked up through the pine branches at the sky, where the clouds were breaking and the first gray light of morning was pushing through from the east, thin and cold and honest, the way mornings always were after nights that cost something. She had work to do. She breathed. She worked through the pain the way she'd been taught to work through everything, methodically, without drama, treating her own body as a problem to be solved rather than a catastrophe to be survived. The wound was a through and through on the left side, below the ribs, above the hip. Bad placement in the sense that it caught muscle and would slow her. Good placement in the sense that it had missed everything that would have ended the conversation immediately. She knew the difference by feel. She'd known the difference for a long time. She cleaned it with what she had, packed it with what she had, taped it with what she had, and the result was ugly and functional in exactly the proportions that field medicine always produced. Then she sat against the wheel well and took inventory. Her name was Elena Vasquez, though the name attached to the logistics contractor ID in her jacket pocket said Sarah Moss, and the name attached to the vehicle registration of the truck parked 50 yards up the logging road said Karen Briggs, and the name attached to the phone she'd just used said nothing at all because it was a burner in its 4th week of operational life. She was 39 years old. She had a scar on her right forearm from a wire obstacle in a training course in Fort Bragg that she'd cleared incorrectly at 19. She had a ceramic plate in her left cheekbone from a market in Mosul that she'd walked into at 27 and walked out of owing something she couldn't quantify. She had, as of approximately 4 hours ago, a through and through in her left side that she was choosing to classify as manageable. She had a mission that was not finished. That was the problem. She'd been tracking the Kessler Ridge ambush cell for 11 days. Not because anyone had tasked her. That wasn't how she worked anymore. Hadn't been for 3 years. She'd picked up the thread from a piece of signals intelligence she wasn't supposed to have access to and wasn't going to explain how she did. Cross-referenced against a pattern of supply chain disruptions affecting relief organizations in 3 states, and arrived at the conclusion that someone was systematically targeting humanitarian logistics in the region for reasons that were either financial or political, or most likely, the kind of tangled combination of both that made people do things they couldn't justify in daylight. She'd identified the canyon ambush site 6 days ago. She'd been in position on Kessler Ridge for 41 hours before the Iron Covenant rolled in. The convoy being the target had surprised her. Not the fact of an ambush, she'd known one was coming, had built the whole operation around that certainty. The specific target had surprised her. 12 bikers moving relief supplies didn't fit the financial profile of the other disruptions she'd been tracking, which had involved pharmaceutical shipments and medical equipment, things with resale value, things that moved easily on secondary markets. Blankets and canned food did not move on secondary markets, which meant the convoy wasn't the real target. The convoy was a message. She'd been working out the recipient of that message ever since the last attacker had withdrawn from the canyon 3 hours ago, and she had a partial answer that she didn't like and a full answer that she liked considerably less. Her phone buzzed. Not the burner. Her other phone, the one with the number she'd had for 6 years that only 4 people in the world possessed. One word, from a contact she'd stored as V. Where. She typed back, mobile working. The response came in 11 seconds, which meant he'd been waiting. We need to talk. She looked at that for a moment. V didn't say, we need to talk. V communicated in operational shorthand, in half sentences stripped of everything except data. Full sentences from V meant something had changed. Timeline, she typed. Now, call me. She looked up at the pine canopy. The sky was lightning fast, full dawn maybe 40 minutes out. She needed to move before full light regardless. She needed a vehicle that wasn't connected to this county. She needed, ideally, a different jacket, because the one she was wearing had blood on it in a pattern that would require a very creative explanation. She called. V picked up on the first ring. His voice was low, accented faintly with something Eastern European that 11 years of American residence had smoothed but not eliminated. He was 61 years old and looked 50 and had the metabolism of a man who lived on controlled stress and strong coffee and the particular discipline of someone who had spent 3 decades being the most dangerous person in most rooms he entered without ever needing to demonstrate it. You're hurt, he said. I'm functional. That's not the same thing. What happened? A pause. The kind that reorganizes itself around something unpleasant before delivering it. The cell you disrupted tonight wasn't independent. You know that. I suspected. They were a component, a single piece of something larger. The operation you've been tracking, the supply disruptions, the logistics interference. It's not criminal enterprise, Elena. Or not primarily criminal enterprise. She waited. It's a contract. Someone hired the network. Someone with resources and patience and a specific objective. And the objective isn't the supplies. The supplies are diversion. They're creating a picture of a region in crisis deeper than the actual crisis, which affects the federal emergency designation, which affects funding allocations, she said, FEMA disbursements, disaster relief contracts, billions of dollars routed to specific vendors through emergency procurement channels that don't require standard competitive bidding. A pause. When you prevent relief supplies from reaching affected communities, the communities appear more severely impacted. The federal designation escalates. The emergency contracts increase. The vendors who are positioned to receive those contracts make more money the worse it gets. Yes. She sat with that for a moment. A through and through in her side and 31 men deployed to steal blankets and canned food, and the reason was money at a scale that made the math feel abstract, even when the math was just hungry people on cots in a converted gymnasium 40 miles north. "Who's the contractor?" she asked. "That's what I need to tell you," V said. "The company holding the primary emergency procurement contract for this region is Vantage Relief Solutions." She knew the name. She knew it the way you knew a piece of furniture that had been in a room for so long you stopped seeing it as furniture, as background, as institutional wallpaper. Vantage Relief Solutions. Mid-sized logistics contractor, federal clients, clean record, offices in 4 states. She'd seen the name on paperwork. She'd moved supplies through their distribution network twice in the last year. She'd had no reason to look at them closely. Vantage is owned, V continued, through 3 layers of holding companies by a man named Franklin Gast. The name sat differently. She'd heard that name in a different context, in a different room, in a different year. A briefing she'd attended as part of a task force that had been quietly dissolved before it produced anything actionable. A name attached to a certain kind of financial architecture, money that moved through legitimate channels at legitimate speed, leaving legitimate paperwork behind it, so clean that by the time you traced it back, you were looking at a man whose lawyers would be in the room before you finished your sentence. "Gast," she said. "He's in the region." She stopped moving. "He arrived 2 days ago. Private travel, low profile. He's staying at a property outside Calvert, a ranch, about 12 miles from where you are right now. I've been watching his travel pattern for 6 weeks, and this is the first time he's moved close to an active operation, which means either he's confident enough to observe in person or something has changed and he needs to be present to manage it. The canyon ambush failed," she said. "That's what changed. If his pattern is to observe and adjust, he's going to adjust," she said. "Tonight, before the heat from the canyon comes down on his local assets. I think so, yes." She was already calculating. Calvert, 12 miles. Logging road to the county route to the highway, highway south. With her vehicle in current condition and the available time before full daylight hardened everything into the kind of visibility that made moving difficult. "Elena." V's voice shifted. The operational register dropped slightly, replaced by something that existed in a separate category, a frequency he almost never used. "You're hurt. You've been in the field for 11 days. You disrupted an operation tonight that is going to make certain people very angry the moment the sun comes up and they start counting what they lost." "I know. The smart move is to extract. Let me get someone else on gas. Let me bring in—" "There isn't someone else," she said. "Not on this timeline." "Elena, V." She stood up. It cost something. She paid it and didn't discuss it. "He's 12 miles away. He's going to make a phone call in the next 4 hours that destroys whatever chance we have of interrupting this at the source. If he adjusts the operation tonight, if he shifts the network before anyone has a legal hook in, then what happened in that canyon happened for nothing. The convoy made it through, but the next one won't, and the one after that. And the communities those supplies are going to will stay in crisis long enough for gas to collect every dollar of the escalated contracts." Silence on the line. "I can get eyes on the ranch," she said. "I can document the contact. If he makes a call, I can record it. That's admissible. That's a hook." "You're not a federal agent." "No. But you know people who are, and I know what I can do with a parabolic mic and a clean line of sight, and you know it too." A long pause. She was walking now carefully toward the truck up the logging road, each step calibrated against the pull in her left side. "If something happens to you out there, then I'll have made a choice," she said. "Same as always." V was quiet. Then, "I'm going to send you the property schematic. I pulled it from county records 6 days ago when I first identified his connection to the region. You've been ahead of this. I've been trying to protect you from it. I know. Send the schematic. He sent it. She got in the truck. The ranch property outside Calvert sat on 40 acres of mixed terrain, open meadow on the west face, pine forest on the north and east, a creek drainage on the south that created a natural barrier and, incidentally, a natural approach corridor for someone willing to move through water and mud for the last quarter mile. The main house was a 2-story structure, recently renovated, the kind of property that described itself as a working ranch while doing no agricultural work whatsoever. There were 3 outbuildings, a gravel access road, and according to the county records V had sent, a well house on the northeast edge of the property that sat at an elevation of roughly 20 feet higher than the main house's east-facing terrace. 20 feet of elevation, clean sight lines to the terrace, and the main house's eastern windows, 140 yards of distance. She parked the truck on a Forest Service road 3 miles north and walked in. It took longer than it should have because of her side and because she was moving carefully, the way you moved when you couldn't afford to stop for any reason, which meant no noise, no visible trail, no broken branches that someone checking a perimeter would find and flag. The creek drainage was cold. She went through it at knee depth at one point, and the water hit the wound dressing with a pressure that produced a specific quality of pain that she breathed through and didn't stop for. She was in position at the well house by 9:47 in the morning. The property was active. 2 vehicles parked near the main house, a black SUV and a silver sedan, both clean and newish, both with the particular anonymity of rental vehicles or agency pool cars. 3 men visible on the grounds, moving with the patient, watchful spacing of security personnel doing perimeter work rather than domestic staff doing actual work. Professional. Not the same composition as the Canyon crew. These were closer held, more expensive, the kind of security that traveled with someone who had a lot to protect. She set up the parabolic directional mic on the well house roof, angled toward the east terrace. Then she settled in and waited, because waiting was the job. Waiting was always most of the job. And the side of her that had been trained in a dozen unglamorous positions, in a dozen difficult places, knew how to do it without the waiting becoming a conversation with itself. At 11:12, Franklin Gast came out onto the terrace. She'd seen photographs. The photographs were inadequate. He was 64, compact and neat, wearing a wax canvas jacket over a collared shirt, the kind of man who looked like he ran a mid-sized outdoor equipment retailer. Approachable face, good posture, the practiced ease of someone who had long ago learned to move through professional spaces without friction. He had a coffee mug. He stood at the terrace railing and looked at the meadow and the pine tree line and the morning sky with the specific pleasure of a man on a property he owned in a region that was performing to his expectations. He made a phone call at 11:19. Elena had the mic aimed and recording before his second sentence. She couldn't hear the other side of the call. She had his half of it, which was enough, because Gass spoke with the deliberate clarity of a man who had learned to be precise on recorded lines. Not because he expected to be recorded, but because precision was how he'd gotten to where he was, and remained the habit of his success. Disruption was unfortunate, but not catastrophic. We're still within operational parameters. A pause. No. The Canyon team was local subcontract. There's no trace. Another pause. The federal designation review is scheduled for the 14th. If we can demonstrate continued supply chain instability through the 12th, the Tier 3 threshold triggers automatically. A pause. The next convoy is the Millbrook route. Thursday. Elena kept the mic steady and breathed slowly and recorded every word and did not move. I'm not concerned about the bikers. They don't know what they interrupted. They think it was a robbery attempt. A laugh, small and genuine. No, the woman is the problem. She stopped breathing. Someone with precision engagement capability was on that ridge. The Canyon team lost 11 personnel. That's not a civilian, and it's not local law enforcement. A pause. Yes, I've already made inquiries. Whoever it was, they were operating without institutional backing. No response units, no agency follow-up, no official presence after the fact. That means they're either freelance or a lone actor. A pause. A lone actor is actually more concerning. No one to report to. No chain of command constraining the operation. Another pause, longer. Find her. Whatever she's doing in this region, she's the thread that can unravel everything. I want her identified and removed from the picture before Thursday." He ended the call. He stood at the railing for a moment longer, drinking his coffee, looking at his meadow. Then he went back inside. Elena lay on the well house roof with a parabolic mic and a through-and-through wound and 11 days of accumulated field time in her body and 40 yards of open ground between her position and the tree line. And she processed what she'd just heard with the particular clarity that arrives when a situation removes all the ambiguity and leaves only the math. He knew someone had been on the ridge. He didn't know who. He was going to allocate resources to find out. He had a timeline of Thursday for the next operation. She had recording of a man explicitly ordering supply chain disruption for financial gain and explicitly ordering the identification and removal of a person, herself, as an operational threat. She had what V needed. She also had the specific problem that, removed from the picture, was not a metaphor in the vocabulary of people who hired 30 armed men to ambush relief convoys, and that the man who had just said it was 60 yards away and had 3 security personnel on the grounds and knew she existed, even if he didn't know where she was. She began moving back toward the tree line, slowly, low. Using the well house structure for as long as it gave her cover, then the shadow of the eastern fence line, then the sparse brush on the drainage edge. Her side pulled with each crouched step. She paid it. She was 20 feet from the tree line when one of the security men came around the corner of the northernmost outbuilding. He wasn't looking for her specifically. He was walking his perimeter pattern, the route she'd clocked during setup, a circuit that should have had him on the south side for another 6 minutes, but perimeter patterns slipped. People got bored, moved faster or slower, took slightly different lines without thinking about it. She'd accounted for deviation in her setup calculation. She hadn't accounted for this much deviation. He was 40 feet from her. She was in the open, crouched at the fence line, with nowhere to go that wasn't conspicuous movement. She went still. Completely still. Not the stillness of hiding. She was visible if he looked directly at her. She knew that. The stillness of being an unremarkable part of the landscape for the 3 seconds it took him to complete his field of view sweep. His gaze moved across the fence line and the drainage edge and the brush in a professional scan, the kind of scan she'd been trained to defeat not through invisibility, but through the exploitation of the human brain's tendency to process movement as threat and discount stationary shapes as background. She was a stationary shape. His gaze moved past her, continued its arc. He walked on. She breathed. She reached the tree line. She moved through the forest at a pace that her side objected to and that she maintained regardless, because the gap between her and the ranch had to open before it closed, before the security pattern cycled back, before gas inquiries set people moving in directions she couldn't monitor from the outside. Halfway back to the truck, her burner phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She answered. Silence for a moment. Then a voice she recognized because she had a good ear for voices and because she'd spent most of the previous night listening to this one on a radio. Overwatch, said Marcus Webb. I'm going to guess you didn't expect this call. She stopped walking. How did you get this number? She said. Not a question. The flattest possible version of the words. Your federal contact talked to my federal contact. Apparently the two of them have a working relationship that predates whatever you think your current institutional status is. I'm not arguing about that, Marcus said. I'm calling because Caldwell told me you were bleeding. I'm calling because a deputy I trust told me you're still in the field, and that someone from the ranch outside Calvert has been asking questions in Marston this morning about last night's canyon incident. And I'm calling because the Iron Covenant is 40 miles south of Calvert right now, all 12 bikes, and I need you to tell me what you need. She stood in the pine forest with blood seeping slowly through her side dressing and the recording device in her left hand, and a through and through that was still classified as manageable, and she said nothing for 3 full seconds. You rode out here, she said. We didn't have anywhere else to be. Mr. Webb. Marcus. Marcus. She said the name like she was testing its weight. I have a recording that a federal prosecutor will find very interesting. I have an injured operational status and limited extraction resources. I have a man 12 miles from here who has just ordered his people to find me and deal with me before Thursday, which is when he plans to hit the next convoy. The Millbrook route, Marcus said. She stopped. How? Caldwell's been working this longer than you think. He had the Millbrook route flagged as a probable next target. He just didn't have a timeline. Now he does. Now he does. And the recording ties the name to the order. She looked up through the pine canopy. The sky was fully light now, flat blue-gray, the storm entirely gone. The world returned to its ordinary visibility. "There's a Forest Service road," she said, 3 miles north of the Calvert property boundary. I have a truck there. "I know the road," Marcus said. "Chunk grew up in this county." "Of course he did. 20 minutes. She walked. It took her 26 minutes because her side disagreed with the terrain, and when she came out of the tree line at the Forest Service road, 3 motorcycles were already there. Marcus, Chunk, and Ricky, all of them off their bikes, all of them looking at her with expressions that contained no pity and considerable assessment, which was the only kind of looking she'd ever been comfortable with. She was not at her best. She knew what she looked like. Field-worn, mud-soaked from the knee down, jacket stained in ways that told a story she didn't need to narrate. She walked upright because she had decided to walk upright, and the decision was final. Marcus looked at her for a moment. His face did something careful and specific, not the thing faces did when they were deciding whether to feel sorry for someone, but the thing faces did when they were revising a calculation they'd been running for 12 hours and finally had the data they needed to complete it. "You're smaller than I thought," he said. "You're older than I thought," she said. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. "Fair. Can you ride?" "I can ride." "Chunk's got a first aid kit on his bike, real one, not the gas station kind. You let him look at that side before we move." "I've already—" "That's not a request," Marcus said. "You bought us out of that canyon. You're not bleeding out on a Forest Service road because you're too stubborn to let someone change a dressing." She looked at him. He looked back at her without flinching, without qualification, with the particular steadiness of a man who had learned a long time ago that some arguments were worth having exactly once. She looked at Chunk. "Fine," she said. Chunk came forward without ceremony, without commentary, with the practical competence of a man who had pulled people out of bad situations before and understood that efficiency was the most respectful thing he could offer. He looked at what she had and redressed it with what he had, which was better than what she had, and neither of them spoke while he worked. When he was done, he stepped back. "Through and through," he said to Marcus. "She's right. It's manageable. It's also going to need actual medical attention inside 6 hours." "Noted," Elena said. "Get on a bike," Marcus said. "Ricky'll ride with you." "I don't need—" "You're not familiar with this road. Ricky is. That's why he's going with you." She looked at Ricky, who was leaning against his bike with his arms folded, watching her with the particular expression of young men who have stopped being afraid of dangerous things and are still figuring out how they feel about it. "You saved Tommy's life," Ricky said. "He made road captain 2 months ago. He's annoying as hell, and I'd rather he stayed alive." Elena said nothing. She got on the back of Ricky's bike. The convoy moved south, 3 bikes, 1 truck trailing behind them on the gravel, and Elena sat behind Ricky Flores with the recording device secured against her chest and the wind coming straight at her and the Forest Service road unreeling ahead of them in the morning light. And she felt something she hadn't expected to feel, which was the specific weight of not being alone in a field for the first time in 11 days. She didn't examine it. It wasn't the time. But she felt it. 5 miles south, Marcus's radio crackled. Caldwell's voice, tight with the particular compression of someone managing multiple moving parts from a position he hadn't expected to occupy this soon. "Webb, tell me you've got her." "Got her," Marcus said. "She have the recording?" Marcus looked over his shoulder. Elena met his eyes from the back of Ricky's bike. She held up the device. "She has it," Marcus said. A breath from Caldwell's end. The sound of something releasing. "Get her to me. We have a federal warrant application ready to file the moment that recording is in my hands. Gas people are already moving. I've got 2 vehicles that just left the ranch heading north, and my read is they're running cleanup on the canyon subcontract before the state police close that loop." "How long do we have?" "Before everything gets complicated? 4 hours, maybe less." Marcus opened his throttle. The 3 bikes accelerated down the Forest Service road toward the county route, and the truck kept pace behind them, and the morning sat clear and cold around all of them. And somewhere behind them, 12 miles south at a ranch on 40 acres of mixed terrain, a man named Franklin Gass stood in a renovated kitchen and made another phone call that he believed was going unheard. He was wrong. He had been wrong since the moment he decided that the people moving supplies through mountain roads in the dark were too small and too unimportant to be protected by anything that mattered. He was still in the process of learning how wrong. Caldwell met them at a fuel depot on the southern edge of Marston, a wide gravel lot behind a commercial trucking company that had been closed since Tuesday, chain-link fence on 3 sides, a corrugated metal building that provided cover from the road. He had 2 other vehicles there, a black SUV with federal plates and a nondescript gray sedan that belonged, by the look of the man leaning against it, to someone whose institutional affiliation was deliberately unclear. Elena clocked the sedan man before she was fully off the bike. Mid-50s, heavy through the shoulders, the kind of stillness that wasn't relaxation. He was watching her the way people watch things they'd been told to assess. She didn't like it, but she'd been not liking things all morning, and the list was long. Ricky killed his engine. She stepped off, and her left side reminded her immediately and specifically of its current condition, and she absorbed it without changing her face and walked toward Caldwell with the recording device already in her hand. Caldwell took it without ceremony. He plugged it into a small field unit he had set up on the hood of the SUV, ruggedized, encrypted, the kind of hardware that didn't come from a consumer catalog. He ran the playback through an earpiece, face neutral, and listened for approximately 90 seconds before he stopped it. "That's enough," he said. "That's more than enough." "Gas name's the Millbrook route," she said. "Thursday. You need to have that convoy rerouted and covered before word gets out that the recording exists." "Already moving on it." He looked up from the field unit. "The warrant application has been sitting ready since 6 this morning. I just needed something attachable." "You had a warrant ready before you had the evidence." "I had a strong hypothesis and a cooperative federal judge who appreciates the difference between acting early and acting wrong." A pause. "You're the evidence, Elena. You've been the evidence since you started tracking this 11 days ago. I just needed you to produce something I could attach my name to." She looked at him. "You knew I was in the field." "I knew someone was in the field. I suspected it was you when the canyon ambush got disrupted in the specific way it got disrupted. And you waited." "I positioned." He said it without apology. "There's a difference." She held his gaze for a moment. It was not a warm moment. Then she looked at the sedan man. "Who's he?" Caldwell glanced over. "Internal review, standard protocol when an asset produces field intelligence without—" "I'm not an asset," she said. "I haven't been an asset for 3 years." Which is precisely the category problem we need to discuss. The sedan man spoke for the first time. His voice was flat, Midwestern, professionally inexpressive. He pushed off the car and walked toward her with a manila folder that he'd been holding loosely at his side. "Ms. Vasquez, I'm Deputy Director Harlan Pruitt. I think you know why I'm here." "I know why you think you're here," she said, which is probably not the same thing. Pruitt stopped in front of her. He was one of those men who used physical proximity as a negotiating tool without being aware that he was doing it, closing distance to assert something, expecting the other person to hold their ground or yield, interpreting both responses as data. She didn't move. She didn't lean away. She just looked at him with the particular patience of someone who had been in worse positions than a gravel lot in Marston. "You conducted an unauthorized armed operation on domestic soil," Pruitt said. "You engaged approximately 30 individuals, resulting in 11 fatalities and multiple injuries. You used a call sign associated with a discontinued federal program. You accessed signals intelligence you are not cleared to access. I prevented a coordinated ambush of civilian humanitarian workers," she said, "recovered evidence sufficient to obtain a warrant for the arrest of a man who has been systematically defrauding the federal disaster relief system, and produced an audio recording that your warrant application needed this morning." She paused. "You're welcome." Pruitt's jaw tightened slightly. "This isn't about gratitude, Ms. Vasquez. This is about the legal framework within which federal operatives, former or otherwise, are permitted to act on domestic—" "Pruitt," Caldwell said it quietly, not loudly. With the weight of a man who had been in the same organization as Pruitt for 20 years and knew exactly which register to use. "She's been awake for 36 hours. She has a through-and-through wound that needs medical attention, and she just handed us the case we've been trying to build for 4 months. The framework conversation can happen at a time and place that isn't this one." Pruitt looked at Caldwell, a held moment. The kind that contained a whole institutional history that Elena wasn't fully inside of and didn't need to be. The recording, Pruitt said finally, is inadmissible as obtained. The recording, Caldwell said, establishes probable cause for a warrant, which will be executed within the next 2 hours, which will produce admissible evidence. The recording is a door, not the room, and the door was opened by someone who had no legal authority to open it. The door was opened by a private citizen on private property within audible range of a conversation conducted on a ranch terrace. Caldwell looked at him steadily. Parabolic microphones are not illegal to own or operate, Harlan, and the property boundary was public land. Pruitt said nothing. He looked at Elena with the expression of a man who had prepared for a specific argument and found that the specific argument had been quietly disassembled before he arrived. The program, he said finally. The Overwatch call sign. You used it. It was operational shorthand, she said. I needed a way to communicate with the convoy without giving my actual name. I used what was available. The program was discontinued. The call sign is a word, she said. I used a word. Words don't get discontinued. Marcus had been standing 15 feet away, arms folded, watching this exchange with the expression of a man at a boxing match who has already picked a side. He said nothing. He was good at saying nothing in ways that nonetheless had weight. Pruitt turned to look at him. Mr. Webb, the Iron Covenant's involvement in transporting this individual. We gave a ride to an injured woman on a Forest Service road, Marcus said. You want to make something of that? You go ahead and make something of it. Pruitt looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at Caldwell. Then he did the calculation that people in his position eventually always did, the one where the cost of pressing forward exceeded the value of what pressing forward would produce, and he closed the manila folder. The warrant execution proceeds, he said. I want a full debrief from Ms. Vasquez within 48 hours. Written, on the record, complete. 48 hours is fine, Caldwell said, after she's seen a doctor. Pruitt walked back to his sedan and got in it and drove out of the lot without looking back, which was the specific body language of a man who had lost a round he hadn't expected to lose and was already rearranging his thinking about the next one. The lot was quiet for a moment. He's going to be a problem, Elena said. He's always a problem, Caldwell said. He's also not wrong about all of it. I know. What you did last night, I know, Caldwell. I need to hear you say that you know. She looked at him. He was watching her with something that wasn't accusation and wasn't exactly concern, the look of a man who needed to know that the person in front of him had a clear-eyed accounting of what they'd done and wasn't going to make him argue about it. 11 people are dead, she said. They were there to hurt civilians. I made decisions in the field that I believed were necessary and proportional, and I will defend those decisions in writing in 48 hours with a complete account. She held his gaze. But I'm not going to tell you I regret the outcome. I'm not asking you to. Then we understand each other. A pause. When did you identify Gast? Last night, before the ambush. V gave me the ownership chain. You should have called me. I was in position on a ridge in a storm with a 30-man operation about to execute below me. Calling you would have required me to leave position or compromise radio silence. I made a judgment call. And the ranch? I went to the ranch because I had 4 hours in a window and nobody else with the right positioning to use it. While bleeding. While managing, she said. Caldwell rubbed the back of his neck. It was the gesture of a man who had been telling himself a version of this conversation for several hours, and was now finding that the real version was both exactly what he'd expected and somehow still exhausting. You need a doctor. Yes. And then you need to sleep. After the debrief. Elena, after the debrief, Caldwell. I want to know the warrant executes and Gast is in a room before I sleep. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone. I'll have someone take you to county medical. Private entry. No paperwork trail on the admission. That works. He stepped away to make the call. Elena stood in the gravel lot and breathed carefully and looked at the corrugated metal building and the chain-link fence and the flat morning sky above Marston, and she became aware gradually of Marcus Webb standing next to her. Not close, not crowding, just present, the way he'd been present all morning, with the specific quality of someone who understood that presence was sometimes the only useful thing to offer. You're federal guy, Marcus said. He knew you were out here. Yes. And he let you run. He positioned, she said. That's apparently the word. Marcus looked at the fence. That bother you? She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. A little. But I would have been out here regardless. He knew that. Using my positioning isn't the same as creating it. That's a fine line. Most lines I walk are fine. Marcus was quiet for a moment. The program. Overwatch. Yes. How long? 8 years active. 3 years. She paused. 3 years in a different status. What does that mean? It means my W-2 says logistics contractor and my actual work is harder to categorize. He nodded slowly. You've been doing this alone. I work with people, others, but no institutional backing, no support structure, no one authorized to send a helicopter if it goes wrong. She said nothing because the sentence was accurate and didn't need confirmation. Last night could have gone wrong, he said. Last night did go wrong, she said, in several places. You know what I mean? Yes. She looked at her hands. They were clean. She'd washed off the field grime at the truck before walking out to the road, but her knuckles were scraped and her left hand had a line of dried something across the palm that she hadn't fully addressed. I knew the risk profile going in. Knowing a risk profile doesn't make the risk smaller. No, it just means you made the choice with open eyes. Marcus looked at her with the expression he'd been using since the Forest Service road. The revised calculation look, the one that was still updating. Why that canyon? Why those bikers? You knew an ambush was coming. Why not let it execute and use the aftermath as your evidence? It was a direct question, the kind that didn't have a comfortable answer. Because people would have been hurt, she said. That's it? That's it. He was quiet. You didn't know us. No. You had nothing to gain from intervening. Tactically speaking, a clean ambush outcome would have created more evidentiary heat around gas operation than a disrupted one. Probably. So from a pure operational standpoint, she said, I should have let it happen and documented the aftermath. She met his eyes. I've been doing this work for a long time. I'm good at the operational standpoint. I'm not always able to maintain it when I'm looking through a scope at 12 people who have no idea what's coming. Marcus said nothing. It's a liability, she said. I know that. Don't tell me. I wasn't going to, he said. She looked at him. I was going to say it's the only reason any of this is worth doing, he said, but I figured you'd already worked that out. Ricky came over from where he'd been standing with Chunk near the bikes. He stopped in front of Elena and looked at her with the specific directness of young men who haven't yet learned to soften their regard in the presence of something they're trying to understand. Tommy's out of surgery, he said. Chunk just talked to the hospital. Full function in the shoulder. They're saying 6 to 8 weeks for full recovery. Elena said nothing. She nodded. He's going to want to meet you, Ricky said. When this is sorted, he's going to want to tell him he's got good people around him, she said. That's what he should know. Ricky looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Marcus. Then he walked back to his bike, which was the behavior of a young man processing something that didn't resolve cleanly into any of the categories he'd come in with. At 12:47 in the afternoon, Caldwell's phone rang. He answered it, listened for 23 seconds, and said, confirmed, and hung up. He walked back to where Elena was sitting on the SUV's running board, the only concession to her side she'd allowed herself in the last 2 hours. Warrant executed, he said. Gast is in custody. Federal detention, no bail pending the arraignment. The ranch? Being processed. Evidence team is on site. He paused. The 2 vehicles that left this morning, the cleanup crew Gast sent north, state police intercepted them on Route 12. Both occupants in custody. Canyon subcontract? The survivors are talking. Apparently losing 11 colleagues in a single engagement by an unknown shooter produces a certain willingness to cooperate. Good. The Millbrook convoy, he said. The one scheduled for Thursday. It'll run. She looked up at him. Rerouted and covered, he said. Full federal escort, plainclothes. The communities it's going to have been waiting on those supplies for 10 days. She looked back at the gravel. Okay, she said. Elena. Yeah. You did good work. She sat with that for a moment. It was a simple sentence. It landed with the specific weight of sentences that are simple because they don't need to be anything else. Pruitt's going to make the debrief difficult, she said. Pruitt makes everything difficult. That's what he's for. Caldwell crouched to her eye level. But the record is going to show what it's going to show. 11 days of field work producing actionable intelligence that 4 months of institutional effort hadn't managed. The canyon disruption, the ranch surveillance, the recording. He paused. The record is on your side. The record doesn't change my legal status. No, but it changes the conversation about your legal status. He stood. Which is a conversation I intend to have with people who have the authority to change things, if you're willing. She looked at him. Are you offering me something? I'm telling you a door exists. What you do with it is your business. She was quiet. The gravel lot sat around her in its utilitarian plainness, chain link and corrugated metal, and the flat midday light of a county that had returned to its ordinary operation without knowing what had been resolved on its roads in the dark. Marcus walked over. He had his helmet in one hand and his keys in the other, which meant the Iron Covenant was preparing to move. He looked at Caldwell. She goes to a doctor before anything else. Agreed, Caldwell said, and someone rides with her. Marcus, Elena said, you spent the night on a ridge making sure my people didn't bleed out, he said. You can have one of mine for 20 minutes to make sure you don't. He looked at her with the expression that had no argument in it, only fact. That's how this works. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked away, at the fence, at nothing specific. Chunk, she said. A pause. Then Chunk's voice from across the lot. Yeah. You know this county. Born here. Any shortcuts between here and county medical that don't involve Route 9? 3 of them. Show me the fastest one. Chunk walked toward his bike without further discussion, which was the behavior of a man who communicated through action and found the habit comfortable. Elena stood up from the running board, carefully, deliberately, fully upright, and walked across the gravel lot to where Chunk's bike was parked. She didn't look back. Behind her, she heard Marcus say something quiet to Caldwell, and Caldwell reply, and the specific quality of their exchange. 2 men in their 50s who had both spent their lives making decisions in difficult situations and were now briefly aligned in the recognition of someone who did the same, settled around her like the specific kind of acknowledgement that never gets said aloud because it doesn't need to be. She got on the back of Chunk's bike. Ready? Chunk said. Go, she said. They rode out of the gravel lot onto the county road, and the Iron Covenant fell in behind them, 12 bikes in loose formation in the flat afternoon light, chrome catching the sun, engines steady and unhurried, carrying a woman they hadn't known existed 24 hours ago through a county that was going about its business in the particular oblivious way of places where the important things had just finished happening in the dark. Elena sat behind Chunk Washington and kept her left side still against the motion of the bike and watched the road come toward her and pass beneath her and disappear behind her, the way roads always did, used and released, the same road for everyone who rode it, the same forward motion, the same cost of moving through the world toward whatever came next. Her phone buzzed. The burner. One message from the contact stored as V. Gast in custody. You okay? She typed back, functional. His response, that's not what I asked. She looked at that for a moment. The trees on both sides of the road. The flat sky. Chunk's jacket in front of her, old leather with a Colorado patch she hadn't noticed before. The kind of wear that came from years rather than miles. She typed, ask me again tomorrow. She put the phone away. The convoy rode south through Marston toward County Medical, and the afternoon held them in its ordinary light, and somewhere 12 miles behind them, in a renovated ranch house on 40 acres of mixed terrain, federal agents were moving through rooms where a man named Franklin Gast had been very certain, until very recently, that the people he underestimated were too small to reach him. He was in the process of learning differently. The learning was going to take a while. County Medical was a low brick building on the south edge of Marston that smelled of antiseptic and recycled air and the specific institutional patience of a place that had seen everything and filed it all under the same general heading. The private entry Caldwell had arranged turned out to be a loading dock on the east side, which Elena found appropriately unglamorous. A nurse met them there, late 40s, no nonsense, the kind of competent that didn't need to announce itself. and took one look at Elena's side and said nothing beyond "follow me," which was exactly the right amount of words. Chunk waited in the parking lot. He didn't ask how long, he just parked his bike and sat on it and looked at the middle distance in the patient way of men who understood that waiting was also a form of work. The wound required cleaning that hurt more than the original injury, which was always the way of it, and 7 stitches, and a dressing that the nurse applied with the brisk efficiency of someone who had dressed field wounds before and recognized this one for what it was without asking questions she hadn't been asked to ask. The doctor, young, 3rd year, the kind of tired that came from overnight shifts and not from age, looked at Elena's overall condition with the expression of someone adding up a column of numbers and not liking the total. "You should be admitted," he said. "I should be," she agreed. "I'm not going to be." "The wound is sutured and dressed and will be monitored." She looked at him directly. "I need 2 things from you: a prescription for the infection risk and written discharge instructions I can follow without being here." He held her gaze for a moment, doing the calculation that young doctors did when they encountered patients who were going to do what they were going to do regardless, whether to fight it and lose or to document it clearly and make sure the person leaving had what they needed to survive their own decision. He wrote the prescription. "If you develop fever above 102, the wound reopens, or you experience significant blood pressure drop, hospital immediately," she said. "I know the markers." "You've done this before." It wasn't quite a question. She didn't quite answer it. She took the prescription and the discharge instructions and folded both into her jacket pocket and walked back out to the loading dock where the afternoon was still going on without her. Chunk was where she'd left him. "How long?" he asked. "Hour and a half." He nodded. He handed her a paper bag. Inside was a sandwich from somewhere: turkey, mustard, the kind of thing that had been assembled without particular artistry and was exactly what a body running on 3 hours of sleep and significant blood loss needed. She ate half of it standing at the loading dock. "You don't have to wait," she said. "Webb said to wait." "Webb's not here." "Webb's always here," Chunk said, with the specific tone of a man whose life had been organized around this fact for 11 years and had made a certain peace with it. She finished the sandwich, shut down. They rode back to where the Iron Covenant had gathered, a diner on Route 9, the same one where Pete and Carol had sat with their coffee at 2 in the morning, though it looked different at 3 in the afternoon with the sun coming through the windows and the lunch crowd thinning out. The bikes were parked in a row along the front, and the riders were inside in 2 booths and a row of counter stools, eating with the focused appetite of people who had been running on adrenaline since midnight and had finally reached the point where the body made its requirements non-negotiable. Marcus was in the back booth. He had coffee and a plate he'd pushed to the side and a phone he set face down on the table when Elena sat across from him. She sat carefully, the stitches pulled. She didn't mention it. "Caldwell called," Marcus said. "What did he say?" "Gas lawyers showed up at 2 o'clock. 3 of them. Corporate defense, the kind that travel together." A pause. "Caldwell said it didn't matter. Said the recording plus the ranch evidence plus the Canyon subcontract testimony adds up to something the lawyers can't walk back." "It does," she said. "Federal disaster fraud plus conspiracy plus the Canyon operation. Gast is looking at decades." Good. The word was simple and he meant it simply, and she found, in the specific plainness of it, something she hadn't expected. Not satisfaction exactly, but the particular settling that happened when a thing that had been wrong in the world was in the process of being corrected, and the correction was going to hold. "The Millbrook convoy," she said. "Thursday. You know about it." "Caldwell briefed me." "Are you running it?" Marcus looked at her. "The Iron Covenant runs relief convoys. That's what we do. We were doing it before last night and we'll do it after. It'll be covered. Federal escort, plain clothes." "I know, Caldwell told me." A pause. "I'd rather have you on the ridge." She said nothing. "That's not a request," he said. "I know you're not. I know how this works. I'm just saying what I'd rather." "It'll be covered," she said again. "It'll be fine." "It was fine last time too," he said, "right up until it wasn't." She looked at her coffee. Gast's network is disrupted. The local subcontract is in custody or cooperating. The financial motive for targeting that route is gone the moment the federal investigation goes public, which it will by end of week. She looked up. "The Millbrook convoy will be boring, the most boring ride your people have ever taken." "Boring sounds good," Marcus said. Boring is the goal, she said. Boring means it worked. He was quiet for a moment. The diner moved around them, the clatter of plates, the specific background noise of a working lunch counter in a small American town. The kind of sound that was so ordinary it had become invisible to the people who lived inside it every day. Elena sat in it and felt the specific texture of ordinary life, the way you only felt it after spending time in its absence, as something valuable and fragile and worth the cost of protecting. The debrief, Marcus said. Pruitt. Day after tomorrow, she said. What happens after? She considered the question. It was the question V had been circling for 3 years, the question Caldwell had gestured toward in the gravel lot, with his careful language about doors and conversations. It was the question she'd been not answering for long enough that not answering it had become a kind of answer in itself. I don't know yet, she said. Marcus nodded, accepted it without pushing. Caldwell's offer. He told you. He mentioned a door. I'm familiar with the metaphor. She looked at him. What do you think? He seemed surprised by the question. Not offended, surprised. The way people were surprised when someone asked for their opinion and actually meant it. He thought about it for a moment, with the unhurried deliberateness of a man who didn't speak before he knew what he wanted to say. I think you've been doing this work alone for 3 years because something happened that made institutional structures feel like a trap, he said. And I think doing it alone has costs that you've been paying without keeping track of them, because keeping track of them would force a conversation you weren't ready to have. He paused. I think last night was expensive, and I think you knew going in that it was going to be expensive, and you went anyway, because the alternative was people getting hurt, and you weren't able to live with that. She said nothing. I also think, he said, that a person who makes that choice deserves to have some backup, not because they can't operate without it, because they shouldn't have to. The diner clattered around them. Someone at the counter laughed at something, a real laugh, the kind that came out of surprise rather than performance. You're a motorcycle club president, she said. Why are you giving me career advice? Because you gave me tactical advice from a ridge in a storm, and I took it, he said. Seemed fair. She almost smiled. It didn't quite make it all the way, but it was closer than most things got. I'll think about it, she said. That's all I said. Tommy Danner was in room 114 of the same county medical building Elena had left 2 hours earlier, and the fact that she was walking back through the front entrance this time, civilian entrance, normal lighting, no loading dock, felt like a different kind of admission than the one she'd resisted earlier. Ricky had texted her the room number. She hadn't replied. She'd gone anyway. Tommy was sitting up when she came in, which surprised her. She'd expected horizontal, pale, the specific deflation of post-surgical recovery. He was pale, and his left arm was immobilized against his chest in a brace that forced his shoulder into a position she recognized as correct for the type of injury, and there were 2 bags running into his right arm and a monitor beeping with the particular patience of machines that had no investment in outcomes. But he was sitting up, and his eyes when she walked in were clear and present. He looked at her for a moment. You're smaller than I thought, he said. That's the second time someone said that to me today, she said. Webb said it too? Yeah. Huh. He adjusted slightly against his pillows, wincing with the specific controlled expression of someone who had been told not to move too much and was negotiating with that instruction. I wanted to... He stopped, started again. I heard the shots. In the canyon. I heard them, and I didn't know what was happening, and then we were moving and I was bleeding, and... Another stop. I just wanted to see who it was. She stood at the foot of his bed. She was bad at this part. She'd always been bad at this part. The part that happened after, when the work was done, and the people it had been done for were in front of her wanting something she didn't have a clean way to give. You're going to be fine, she said. 6 to 8 weeks. That's what they tell me. He looked at his immobilized arm. I rebuilt my Road King from a salvage frame. Takes longer than 8 weeks. So you've got time, she said. He looked at her, 26 years old, the newest full-patch member of a club that had been running relief convoys through mountain weather because they believed in doing something useful with their time and their machines. 3 months into a membership that had cost him a shoulder on his 4th run. Was it worth it? He asked. The convoy. What we lost. Was the delivery worth it? She thought about the community center in Ridgeport. The 200 people on cots. The old man in the flannel shirt that was 2 sizes too large. She thought about Pauline, the relief coordinator, with her clipboard and red-rimmed eyes, and the expression that shifted when she saw what was on the flatbed. "Yes," she said. Tommy looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded, once, with the specific quality of someone filing a piece of information in the right place. "Okay," he said. She stood at the foot of his bed for another moment. She was about to leave, had already shifted her weight toward the door, when he said, "What's your name?" She paused. "The real one," he said, "not Overwatch." She looked at him. At 26 years old in a hospital bed with a shoulder that was going to take 8 weeks to heal, and a Road King that took longer and a patch 3 months old on a cut that was probably folded in a plastic bag in the room somewhere. "Elena," she said. He nodded. "Tommy." "I know," she said. "Get some rest." She walked out. The debrief was held in a federal field office in a city 2 hours south of Marston, in a conference room with the specific aesthetic of government spaces everywhere. Gray carpet, fluorescent lighting that was slightly too bright, a whiteboard with old marker ghost marks that had survived multiple rounds of cleaning. Pruitt was there. Caldwell was there. 2 other people whose institutional affiliations Elena had cataloged by their body language before they introduced themselves. One justice, one somewhere in the intelligence community that was being deliberately vague about exactly where. V was not there, which was the arrangement and the agreement. Elena sat at the table in clean clothes, her own, not field gear, the specific civilian presentation she maintained for exactly these situations, and delivered a complete account of 11 days of field work with the precision and organization of someone who had been composing the report in her head since the logging road. She did not omit anything. She did not soften anything. She presented the decisions she'd made in the sequence she'd made them, and the reasoning behind each one, and the outcomes produced. And she answered questions with the same directness, including the questions Pruitt asked that were designed to find the edges of her legal exposure, and the questions the justice representative asked that were designed to assess the same from a different angle. It took 4 hours. At the end of it, Pruitt looked at his notes. The intelligence community person, name she'd been given as Ferris, which she believed about as much as she believed any name in a room like this, looked at his notes. The justice representative looked at Caldwell. The recording, the justice representative said, has produced a warrant return that includes financial documentation connecting Vantage Relief Solutions to 3 separate shell entities used to direct fraudulent procurement payments. The Canyon operation is being prosecuted federally. GAST is cooperating on the financial side in exchange for considerations that I'm not going to specify in this room. He's giving up the network, Elena said. He's giving up components of it. Enough. A pause. The case is solid. Good. Pruitt set down his pen. He looked at Elena with the expression he'd had in the gravel lot. Revised, slightly, now that he'd had 2 days to revise it. Not warm, but revised. The legal status question, he said. Your operational activity over the past 3 years. Domestic engagements, signals access, the use of the Overwatch identifier. Yes, she said. Justice has reviewed the record. The domestic engagements fall within a defensible interpretation of citizen intervention in circumstances of imminent harm. The signals access, he paused, is a separate matter that I'm going to describe as under review, which is the most accurate thing I can say. She understood what that meant. It meant it was being put in a drawer labeled complicated, and the drawer was being closed, not locked, but closed, and the closure was conditional on her understanding that it was closed. The Overwatch call sign, Pruitt continued. The program is not going to be discussed in any official capacity in connection with your current activities. Also understood. Which brings us, Caldwell said, and his voice carried the specific weight of a man who had been waiting for this part of the conversation for longer than 2 days, to the question of what your current activities are going to look like going forward. The room was quiet. Elena looked at the whiteboard ghost marks. She thought about a ridge in a storm. She thought about 12 people who didn't know they were being protected until they were already through the gap in the canyon wall. She thought about V's text message. That's not what I asked. And Tommy Danner at 26 sitting up in a hospital bed wanting to know the real name of the person who'd been on the ridge. She thought about Marcus Webb on a gravel lot saying you deserve to have some backup. What are you offering? She said. Caldwell leaned forward slightly. A framework, contractual, not employment, maintains your operational independence while providing access to intelligence resources, legal cover for domestic activities within specified parameters, and, he paused, backup, when you need it. Parameters specified by, jointly, non-negotiable items on both sides, negotiated items in the middle, and Pruitt's review board. Post-operation review, Pruitt said, not pre-authorization. You operate and account for it afterward. The review determines whether the parameters were maintained. And if they weren't, then we have a different conversation. She looked at him. I won't be managed. The framework isn't management, Caldwell said. It's structure. There's a difference. People say that and mean management. I know. I'm not those people. She looked at Ferris, who had said very little. And your institution's interest in this arrangement. Ferris looked at her with the careful neutrality of someone who had been in rooms like this for a long time. We have operational gaps in certain categories of domestic adjacent activity that institutional frameworks don't fill well. Someone with your profile and your track record and your... He paused, choosing. Motivation fills those gaps in ways that are difficult to replicate through conventional hiring. My motivation, she said. You went into a canyon in a storm with 30 people in it because you couldn't watch civilians get hurt without doing something about it. That's not a skill. That's a character trait. A pause. It's very useful. As long as it doesn't become inconvenient. Nothing about you is convenient, Ms. Vasquez, but inconvenient and useful are not mutually exclusive. She sat with that for a moment. It was, she thought, possibly the most honest thing anyone in this building had said to her in 4 hours. She looked at Caldwell. I want V's exposure cleared. Whatever signals access questions exist around his work, cleared. That's non-negotiable. Caldwell glanced at Ferris. Something passed between them. Quick. The compressed communication of people who had already discussed certain contingencies before arriving. Agreed, Ferris said. I want operational veto on assignments I determine to be outside my ethical framework. Defined how, Pruitt said. By me. At the time. Reviewed afterward by your board. Pruitt's jaw tightened slightly. That's the line, she said. Without it, there's no arrangement. A silence. Agreed, Caldwell said. Pruitt looked at him. Another held moment between two men who had worked together long enough to know when a line had been crossed in a negotiation and when it had been correctly drawn. Pruitt picked up his pen. We'll draft a framework document, he said. Review period of 30 days. Fine, she said. She left the building at 4:47 in the afternoon and stood on the sidewalk outside a federal field office in a city 2 hours from Marston and breathed the cold air that was coming in off the northwest, the leading edge of another weather system building somewhere over the mountains. She could smell it, that particular mineral cold of incoming rain, the way the air changed its quality before the first drop fell. She pulled out her phone, the real one. V picked up before the first ring finished. How did it go? Framework agreement. 30-day review. A pause. Elena. Your exposure is cleared. Non-negotiable item. Agreed to. Another pause. Longer. She could hear in the texture of it something V almost never allowed into his voice. The specific quality of relief in a man who had been holding something tightly for a long time. You didn't have to... Yes, I did, she said. It put you in a weaker negotiating position. I wasn't there to negotiate. I was there to make a decision. She looked at the sky. Come in. What? The framework includes you. Come in. Stop running the parallel operation out of that apartment in Denver that I pretend I don't know about. Silence. V. I heard you. I need someone I trust inside the structure. The framework is only as good as the people operating inside it. And if I come in, you trust it more. Yes. A long pause. The sound of a man in an apartment in Denver looking at something. His work, his walls, the years of operating in the parallel space that existed between institutions and outcomes. The space she knew well because she'd lived in it too. Give me a week, he said. Take 2, she said. Do it right. Elena. Yeah. I'm glad you're not dead. Me too, she said. Get some sleep. She hung up. She stood on the sidewalk for another moment. Then she called Marcus. He picked up on the third ring, which meant he'd seen her name and considered whether to answer, not because he didn't want to, but because he was that kind of person, deliberate, even with phones. "How'd it go?" "How'd it go?" he said. "Framework agreement. 30 days to finalize. That a good thing?" "Ask me in 30 days. "Fair enough." She could hear background noise, engines, wind, the specific acoustic signature of a man standing outside near motorcycles. "Where are you?" "City south of Marston, heading back up. We're leaving Marston in about 20 minutes. Millbrook convoy's been confirmed for Thursday." "I know." "It's going to be a boring ride," he said. And she could hear in his voice, very faintly, something that was not quite humor but was close to it, the kind of tone that a man uses when he is quoting someone back at them because the quote was accurate. "Good," she said. "Boring is the goal." "Boring is the goal," he said. A pause. "Elena," he said. It was the first time he'd used her name. She'd told him Overwatch. She'd told Tommy. But the name, used by Marcus Webb in that particular register, not testing it, not performing it, just using it, landed differently than she'd expected. "Yeah," she said. "I'm glad you were on that ridge." She looked at the sky. The clouds were moving in fast from the northwest, pushing ahead of the new weather system, and the light was going gold and cold at the edges the way light did before rain. "Ride safe," she said. "Always do," he said. "Almost always." She ended the call. She stood on the sidewalk outside the federal building and looked at the incoming weather and thought about the next 30 days and the framework document and V in his Denver apartment, and Tommy Danner in a hospital bed working toward 8 weeks of recovery, and the old man in the too large flannel shirt, and the 200 people on cots in a gymnasium who had gotten their supplies because 12 bikers had ridden into a storm and one woman had been on a ridge above them. She thought about the Millbrook convoy running on Thursday through safe roads with federal cover and no one on a ridge because no one needed to be on a ridge. She thought about what came after Thursday, the next operation, the next thread she'd pick up. And there would be a next thread. There was always a next thread. The world produced them in steady supply. The difference was that the next one she picked up, she wouldn't be picking it up alone. She wasn't entirely sure how she felt about that. Change of that kind didn't settle cleanly. It sat in you with a certain resistance, the way anything sat that required you to revise a version of yourself you'd been maintaining for a long time. But resistance wasn't refusal. She walked to her car. The Millbrook convoy ran on Thursday. 12 bikers, 2 cargo vans, 1 flatbed. The same route, the same destination, the same communities waiting on the same supplies that had been delayed by weather and human calculation and the specific cruelty of people who saw suffering as a financial instrument. It was boring, magnificently, completely boring, cold and dry and uneventful, the way mountain roads were when the only things on them were people trying to get somewhere useful. Federal plainclothes vehicles paced them at distance in vehicles that tried to look civilian and mostly succeeded. Nobody was on any ridge. Nobody needed to be. The supplies arrived at Ridgeport at 11:40 in the morning. Pauline was at the loading bay again. Same clipboard, same red-rimmed eyes, though rested now, the red coming from a different kind of tired than before. She looked at Marcus when the flatbed pulled in. "You made it," she said. "That's what we do," he said. They unloaded for 30 minutes. Tommy Danner was not there. His shoulder was 6 days into its 8 weeks, but his Road King was in the parking lot of the community center because Ricky had ridden it up for him, and the sight of it sitting in the thin November sunlight with its chrome picking up what light there was seemed to mean something to the riders who walked past it. Nobody said what it meant. Nobody needed to. In the gymnasium, the old man in the too large flannel shirt, his name, Marcus learned, was Earl Briggs, 73, retired electrician, third-generation resident of Ridgeport, whose house had taken 4 feet of water and who had been on a cot for 9 days, was sitting with a cup of coffee when Marcus came through to check that the supplies were being distributed correctly. Earl looked up at the Iron Covenant patch and the president's rocker and nodded once. Marcus nodded back. He went back to his people. 3 weeks after the canyon, on a Tuesday evening that had the cold, specific quality of late autumn settling into winter, a military challenge coin appeared on the old gravel service road at the mouth of the mining gap in the north wall of the canyon. Nobody saw who left it. The road was quiet, no traffic, no reason for anyone to be there. The canyon having returned to its ordinary use as a passage through mountain terrain with no particular history attached to it beyond what the people who'd been in it that night carried with them. The coin sat on a flat piece of rock at the gap's entrance, sheltered just enough from the weather by the overhang above it to have stayed there for however long it had been there before the Iron Covenant found it. Marcus found it on a solo ride he took on a Wednesday morning when the weather was cold but dry, and he had no particular reason to go that way except that he did. He stopped his bike. He got off and walked to the gap and crouched and looked at the coin without touching it for a long moment. It was old, the finish worn at the edges, the face somewhat difficult to read, the kind of wear that came from years of handling or from years of being carried close to a person. The design on the face was simple, an eye over a horizon line, with no text except a single number and a date below the horizon that he couldn't fully make out. He picked it up. He turned it in his fingers. He looked at the gap in the canyon wall, the fractured rock, the width just sufficient for a flatbed truck, the rough edges where water and frost had done their slow work over decades. He looked at the service road beyond it, going north. He looked at the ridge above the canyon, where the pine trees ran up to the ridgeline and the ridgeline met the sky. He put the coin in the inside pocket of his cut, against his chest. He rode back. That night, at the Iron Covenant's weekly table, he set the coin in the center. His riders looked at it. Chunk picked it up, turned it, passed it to Ricky. Ricky looked at the worn face and passed it to the man next to him. It went around the table without a word, each man holding it for a moment, each man returning it, until it came back to Marcus. He put it back in his pocket. "What do we do with it?" Ricky asked. "Nothing," Marcus said. "We know what it means." "She left it." "Yeah." "Why?" Marcus thought about this. He thought about a woman he'd spoken to for 20 minutes total in person, and several minutes on the radio in a canyon in a storm, and a few minutes on a phone call from a sidewalk in a city 2 hours south. He thought about the specific quality of her stillness on the back of Ricky's bike. Not peace, not ease, but the particular composure of someone who had learned to occupy difficult positions without telegraphing their cost. "Because she wanted us to know she was still out there," he said, "and because she wanted to know we'd remember what happened here." "We'd remember without the coin," Chunk said. "Yeah," Marcus said, "but this way she knows it." The table was quiet. Outside, the wind came off the mountains with the first suggestion of winter in it. Real winter. The kind that would close the high passes and put ice on the canyon roads and make the overnight runs harder in all the ways that cold made hard things harder. The Iron Covenant would run anyway. They'd run the Millbrook route and the Ridgeport route and whatever route came next that needed running, because that was the shape of the work, and they'd chosen the shape a long time ago. Somewhere in a city that wasn't Marston, in an office that wasn't exactly an office, Elena Vasquez was reading a document that was 30 pages long and had been redlined in 7 places, and was in its 4th revision, and was going to require at least 2 more conversations with Pruitt before the language satisfied both of them. She had coffee she'd let go cold and a notepad with handwritten margin notes, and a window that looked out on a street going about its ordinary business, in the ordinary way of streets, in cities where the extraordinary things happened somewhere else. Her phone sat on the desk. The real one. V had texted an hour ago. "Flight Thursday. Denver direct. Need a pickup." She'd texted back, "I'll be there." She had a wound that was healing correctly and a framework document that was going to be signed, and a contact at a federal field office who had shown her, on a gravel lot in the rain, that the line between institutional and independent was finer than she'd let herself believe for 3 years. She had work ahead of her that she understood and that understood her, and the understanding was imperfect and complicated and real. She had what she'd always had, the ability to see through a scope and understand exactly what was in it, and the inability to see people in trouble and look somewhere else. The second one had cost her more than the first had ever given her, and she was old enough now to know that the cost was the point, that the work only meant something because of what it cost, and that people who did this kind of work in the dark without recognition or acknowledgement were not doing it despite the absence of recognition, but in some way because of it, because the work that nobody knew about was the work that nobody had shaped to fit their knowing. She picked up the notepad. She made a margin note. She went back to the document. The wind came through the city and pushed at her window and moved on. Outside Marston, on a mountain road that was quiet and cold and empty in the way of roads. After the last vehicles have passed through, a piece of gravel service track ran north from the canyon gap through mixed pine forest toward the valley. Tire marks on the gravel. Boot prints in the softer shoulder. The physical record of a night when 12 people got through something they shouldn't have gotten through, because someone had been in a position to help them and had been unable to choose otherwise. The rain came eventually. It always did in that country, in that season. It came down through the pines and hit the gravel and erased the boot prints and softened the tire marks and filled in the small depressions and eventually made the road look the way it always looked, ordinary, unremarkable, a passage through terrain with no particular story attached to it. The canyon sat in its ordinary silence. The ridge above it held the dark. And somewhere beyond the next storm, in the next place where someone needed the thing that institutions couldn't quite reach and individuals couldn't quite sustain alone, a woman who had learned the difference between those two insufficiencies was already moving toward the position. Because some people don't wait to be asked. They read the terrain, they take the shot that needs taking, and they're gone before anyone thinks to look up at the ridge. And the only proof they were ever there is that everyone who needed protecting made it out.